Hi guys, welcome back to another video. So today is Monday, which usually means it's a sketchbook session or some kind of traditional art, and today's session was not exactly planned. So you can see that I have a sketch of Freminet and I have this border of washi tape around it because I was planning on painting this piece with gouache. So I initially was going to just follow the same steps as I would kind of like as if I'm preparing to paint with gouache. So I do have my Color ENO in the color red as my initial sketch, and you can see me using my kneaded eraser to kind of lift up my sketch a little bit to lighten it. But I am going to be using the Prismacolor Colerase in the color Carmine to kind of pick out some lines where I don't really want my watercolor washes to lift up too much of the pigment or to wash out, just because the previous pencil is kind of more water soluble, so it kind of disappears. But I am not going to be working with gouache today. I decided that I didn't want to spend as much time on this piece, nor did I have enough time to just sit down and do a full session where I could record properly of me doing this piece with gouache. So I am just gonna kind of do a mishmash of a bunch of different traditional mediums together to bring it up to a certain finish that I think kind of turned out pretty cute. So we're starting off with watercolor, and then we'll go on to a few other mediums before we kind of tie it all together at the very end, where I do some kind of like line work or line art. So like I mentioned, because the days kind of melded all together in my brain last week, I did not have this session planned, and I was thinking that I was going to do another kind of inking video or Inktober video, Inktober related video, I guess would be a better way of putting it. But I decided maybe I wouldn't do it, just because I don't want to be making too many videos centered on inking, just because I know some people don't prefer watching that, or maybe you get tired and sick of just watching just the same kind of inking-ish type of video. So I'll just squeeze in Inktober stuff maybe every so often, or I will put the Inktober kind of overview at the very end. So every day that I can record some portion of me inking the Inktober piece that I'm doing for whatever day, I will definitely kind of put that towards a more like overview video, and we can have kind of like a look into the process a little bit, and then I can do a overview of the actual all 31 drawings whenever I do end up recording that video. So for probably the rest of October, I won't do too many inking videos. I think there is one that I would like to do just because I want to revisit using screen tones again, and I think it would just be fun, and it's kind of a nice way for me to revisit inking with some fine liners if I wish to do that for the basis of like my base of the screen toning. So I'll definitely think about that, but for now, we're not doing a spread today. So yeah, this is the only piece that I'm going to be working on, and I know this video is going to be kind of on the shorter side in terms of just like either the process or just like the entirety of it just seems a lot shorter, just because the way how I approached this was actually a lot quicker. I think I did this one in maybe 45 minutes, so it's kind of easier for me to cut down the footage just because each section kind of went by quite quickly. So you can see that I was kind of taking my time building up value, adding my desired shadows here and there for Freminet, and I was trying to make sure that it kind of appears somewhat clean, just because even though I know that watercolor doesn't behave the way that I would like it to behave in the sketchbook, I still want to be able to have some of that control, because it is a nice way to quickly add color in a certain kind of manner, but it does dry a little bit more splotchy and usually not very smooth for the first pass. So I did try my best to keep it a little bit more, I don't know, readable for the most part, because I also did not end up keeping a lot of my sketch lines in, just because it does kind of get washed away from the watercolor water and the paint being placed on top. So to kind of spruce up the drawing a little bit, to add a little bit more dimension as well, and just to kind of push the intensity of the color as well, I decided to go in and add a little bit of pencil crayons, or for you guys maybe colored pencils might be an easier way to kind of explain what I'm doing. So I'm kind of just layering up some of the colors. So I'm focusing on his face. Later on, I'm going to be pushing kind of more of that teal turquoise color a lot more, just because I find it really pretty. And I feel like it complements his color palette quite nicely, because Freminet has a lot more like, how to explain this? More of a, like a, not a rustic gold, but it's kind of like fairly neutral toned. But he has a lot of navy, some just like a lot of white or like slightly more cream colored. But then he has like these small little pops of these very intense kind of teal or light blue, either from like glowing objects or like just like little accents of color on his entire outfit, which I think looks super cute. But I decided that I would just use that colored pencil to also just make certain areas pop a little bit more, because that colored pencil is a little bit more opaque in a way, where it's able to layer on top of the darker colors and like really show up nicely. So I did do this kind of layering of colored pencils on top of the watercolors before on a different kind of sketchbook spread, where I kind of kept things a lot looser and a little bit more messy, and it feels a little bit more carefree, which happens to be that Klee sketchbook spread. And I do like what it looks like, but this one I did want to have a little bit more control. So even though you can see that I decided to take kind of like a darker blue and do a little bit of line work for the flowers, I did not really like the thickness of the lines all that much. So I'm just gonna stick with using more or less the colored pencils for the kind of like accents or smoothing things out or intensifying colors. And I'm gonna do line work on top to kind of tie everything together. So I did attempt trying to do the line work with a sharper kind of darker blue, but I didn't really like how it's kind of laying down, so I decided to switch to a ballpoint pen. And luckily, because I didn't really press too hard with the colored pencils, I didn't really build up a waxy or shiny surface. So my ballpoint pen was having a very easy time kind of being able to roll the ink onto wherever I needed it to, but I'm also taking my time kind of like darkening up certain corners. You can see I'm doing it a lot during like when I was doing Freminet's bangs, because it kind of gives it a little bit more depth and kind of mimics the changing of line weight, as if you were to use like, you know, kind of like digitally, or if you're using like an actual brush pen. If you press harder, you get a thick line. You press lighter, you kind of get a thinner line, and you can do that usually in like one fell swoop. But even for me, whenever I do like digital line work or I'm doing traditional line work, I usually like to manually thicken up lines later on, just because for me, I just like having a little bit more control, and I am a little bit weaker when it comes to using, I guess, like a brush pen of any sort, or maybe even like a dip pen, where you can vary the line variation or like the line thickness depending on how much pressure you have. And sometimes I become very heavy-handed, sometimes I'm too light-handed, so I don't think I get a good variation of line width. So I will just manually put it in like on my own after the fact, like after I laid down the lines itself. But I do like using the ballpoint pen to kind of doing the line work for this one, just because I can get a little bit of those softer lines here and there. But because this pen in particular, and these are the Papermate Inkjoy pens, they lay down quite a bit of ink if you go back and forth, and they kind of give more of a rich color. In this case, I'm using black, but it does have more of a rich feeling ink, where it's like more of a solid black, and it's not really kind of like faded or anything like that. Because I do have another pen, which is the Pentel RSVP, and that one feels more closer to a mechanical pencil, where it feels like I have to take a little bit more care and effort to slowly build up value, because it does have more of a sharper but kind of more faint line. So it would be a lot of back and forth of me scribbling with the pen to get like the desired probably darkness that I would want to have for the pen. But because this one kind of like dispenses quite a bit of ink, I'm able to have the lines stand out quite nicely, and I don't really have to worry about, you know, putting a lot of pressure or having to go back and forth too much to get kind of like my desired value for the line work. And I do think that the kind of black ink for the line work. It just fits nicely to tie everything together. I could have used a dark blue, but I feel like black just consistently is just dark enough for the entire piece, because I do have some areas where the dark, kind of like navy or dark blue, becomes a little bit too dark. So some of my lines probably would have gotten lost anyways. And I don't know. For me, I kind of like this look. I have a few pieces either in previous sketchbooks, and I think maybe 1 or 2 in this sketchbook where I've done watercolor washes of some sort, or even just like markers where it's kind of faint, kind of like splotchy, kind of messy, and using a ballpoint pen or some kind of darker ink so that I can kind of tie it together, and then the ink kind of brings it all together by making things look a little bit more structured or a little bit more clean in a sense. It's the same way how I tend to leave a lot of my sketch lines in if I'm working with pencil, but once I start to darken my lines or to really add more value, a lot of my sketch lines kind of get lost in the entire piece, so they become less apparent, which I still kind of really like the look of that, because you can kind of see a little bit of the process of how the artist works a little bit, because you can see some of their guidelines or some of their strokes where you see their gesture and stuff. I think what's their name? I think it's Birdie's Art or something like that. Their pencil work is the one that really got me back into doing a lot of traditional medium, and mostly like the reason why I love graphite so much, because I love seeing how much energy and how much detail and care they take in doing their graphite drawing, and just like where they place lines, where they decide to darken things, and they often leave a lot of their sketch lines in. And I just really like looking at people's sketches a lot. So yeah, so for the rest of this video, actually, other than me kind of sprucing some things up with the colored pencil once again, you can see that this color of the colored pencil really works on the darker areas to kind of give a little bit more of that reflective light, which I think looks really pretty. I also feel like the washi tape was not really necessary, but the reason why I had it there in the first place was because I was planning on painting the entire piece with gouache. But because I'm not doing that, yeah, it wasn't really as necessary, but it was kind of nice having a little bit of a clean border. But I think that's it for today's session. So the rest of the video will be just time lapse of the entire piece, just because I did end up cutting out quite a bit of the process, but because the amount of footage I had for this piece was very little anyways, I feel like it's not too bad for me to do an overall time lapse of the entire piece at the very end. So I'll probably leave that with you guys here today for the rest of the session, but hopefully you guys have a wonderful Monday, or if it's Tuesday for you, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!